There we go.
I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Laura Janusik, representing the International Listening Association, and we have two wonderful guests with us today, Tom and Michael, who have created technologies connecting power through their organization, Someone to Tell It To. Before I introduce them, I want you to think about those moments that you have in your life where you sit down with someone face to face and you totally lose track of time. It's just such a wonderful conversation that after it ends, you have no idea whether it was 10 minutes past or 2 hours past. All you know is you feel really good. Not so hard to do face to face, but how many of you have been able to do that using technology? Using technology, it's a lot more challenging, but I can tell you my personal experience with the two gentlemen that we'll be able to talk with today, Tom and Michael, that it is definitely possible. The first time I called them, and we Skyped actually, I thought that we would talk maybe 30 minutes tops. That's what I had allotted for us. 2 hours later, we were still talking. These gentlemen have a gift of being able to use social media to make us feel listened to. So it is just absolutely phenomenal, and I'm glad that you're here to join us today for this. So before we meet them, let me give you a few of the parameters of what needs to be done today. Phil, if you could talk a little bit about the technology, that would be terrific.
Sure, certainly. Welcome, everybody. We just have a few tips to help make this experience a little bit more enjoyable for all of you. First of all, I'm going through right now, and if I haven't already muted your microphone, I'm going to mute all microphones. Video cams can be turned off by you. Where I could turn off the video cam. This way, with the microphones muted, we lessen the possibility of feedback. When it comes time for questions, I'll be able to unmute people. Now, along the bottom of your screen, and sometimes it might be on the side of your screen, depending upon the device that you're connected with, you should see a control panel. And on the control panel, going from left to right, the first thing you'll see is a microphone icon. And when you're muted, you should see the red slash. You should see a camera icon, and you should also see a red slash if that's muted. But then you'll see a little icon about halfway through that says chat. That's the chat box. If you have any questions during the course of the webinar, or when we do open it to questions, that's the place for you to type your questions in. The one thing that I would ask you, however, is to make sure that you have it set for host and more primarily for myself, Philip Turpak. And I'll be monitoring all those questions. So when it comes time for questions and to chat with our hosts, I'll be able to unmute you and we can have a little dialogue there. If the connection happens to freeze for you, or you are just suddenly dropped for some reason, just exit out and you can reconnect on the link that was given to you originally. There's no password, so you should be easily to connect. After the meeting is over, when you want to leave, and in the right-hand corner, there's a thing that says End Meeting. That's all you have to do. We'll also be having, and I think Lori will talk about this for just a moment, an after session too. And welcome, and I hope you enjoy today's session.
Great, thanks, Phil. And as Phil indicated, and this was actually his brainstorm, which is wonderful, and Tom and Michael have agreed to this, we are going to have an after session. So today's webinar will last approximately an hour, and then we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and open it up for discussion. So the second hour will be dedicated solely to discussion. So if you're interested in the topic, and I think you will be, and if you have time to stick around, I definitely invite you to do so. I'm Laura Janusik. I'm the producer of the webinar series for the International Listening Association. I'm here at Rockhurst University in Kansas City, Missouri, and I'm actually here right now. We're having a Competitive Scholars Day today, which means that we have over 800 people as guests to the campus. So I have put a little sign on the door that says webinar in progress, and I'm hoping nobody knocks while we're here. My research areas are listening cognitions, metacognitions, and pedagogy. I've been an ILA member since 1998, the president from 2010 to 2011, and I also have my own consulting business as well called Listening to Change. And we have our technological moderator, Phil Turpak. None of this would be possible without Phil. So Phil has learned how to use this webinar system, and he is teaching us how to use it as well. So it's still a work in progress, I'll say. He's an instructor of communication studies at Northern Virginia Community College. He's a Virginia master teacher, and his specialty area is listening and student success. He too was an ILA president from 2015 to 2016. Now, because these next two guys who are actually our guests today are so fascinating, I am going to allow them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about someone to tell it to. So we have, actually you can see their names are inverse because Michael is really on the right. Michael, go ahead and wave for a second.
Hi.
Yep. And Tom is on the left there. And Michael and Tom, I am going to stop sharing the PowerPoint for a second so you can tell us a little bit about someone to tell it to.
That's good. Well, thank you all for being with us today. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you live. This is fascinating to us that we're able to connect with people literally all around the world. So grateful to be here. So I'm Tom, and I'm one of the two co-founders of our nonprofit. Is called Someone to Tell It To. And the name of our organization, Someone to Tell It To, comes from an Australian author, Miles Franklin. And Miles Franklin once said that someone to tell it to is one of the fundamental needs of human beings. We say that we believe that because we've experienced it both in our own lives, both personally and professionally. And so 5 years ago, we just had our 5-year anniversary actually in January. So that was something that we celebrated together. We had the special calling to kind of create a safe environment for people to be able to share their stories. And kind of our mission statement is this, that our hope is that we would create a caring culture that accompanies others on a journey towards deeper connections. And so we try to create a safe space for people to be able to share their stories vulnerably, authentically, openly. And we connect with people here, and we live in central Pennsylvania. So we do meet some people face to face, but we actually have people from around the country and all around the world now, I think in probably about half a dozen or 10 countries that we've fostered, we hope, deep and meaningful connections with.
We believe, and one of the reasons that we started this nonprofit is that there is just an epidemic of loneliness that exists in human beings, that we fundamentally are not as connected with one another as we can be and probably need to be. We also believe that everyone has something to say, and everyone has a voice that needs to be heard. And we know from listening to people that many people don't feel as if they are heard. And we want to help to provide that vehicle, for the means for them to be heard and to know and to share with the world that it's important that all of us can be. And we just believe that as well as human beings, we're going to talk about this later, but that we all have more in common with one another than what is different, from one another. And we focus on that and believe that's important. In a world that is often filled with brokenness and pain and violence and war and misunderstanding, that if we can truly listen to one another, if we can realize that all of us have value and worth, and deserve to be heard. And that if we all realize that there is more that we can share, the world would be a better place. And that's a strong hope of ours, that we can share that with the world.
That's absolutely true, and that's something that you two are each doing your individual work and your collective work to achieve. And so I personally thank you for doing that. I know that you're sitting in the middle of Pennsylvania right now, and when you talk about listening to people, you talk about listening to people around the world. So in many, many different countries. And actually today we've got a number of different countries represented on the webinar. We've got somebody from Australia, somebody from the Netherlands, someone from the Russian Federation, and I think that's the first time a webinar has been attended by someone from the Russian Federation, a number of people from the United Kingdom, and a number of people from the United States. So that's at last count. But I am curious as to what the catalyst for today's webinar is. I know that you reached out to Helen at the International Listening Association. So tell us a little bit about the catalyst for wanting to do a webinar.
Well, we actually attended or were part of another webinar that on listening, and there were one or two comments actually throughout that webinar about the negative effects of social media and how unhealthy it can be, how some people overshare, some people put false things about themselves that they're really not telling the truth, and so there was just this understanding that social media could be pretty negative. And we understand that, and we agree that there are a lot of things that are unhealthy. There's a lot that goes on, through social media that's not good. But we also believe, and that's why we're here today, that we can use social media to truly connect with one another around the world in different cultures with different backgrounds and experiences and beliefs. And that's why we wanted to do this, to show that, yes, social media has its problems, but it also has many, many good things that can be shared, that can be done with it. I mean, the fact that we can connect with people around the world from these various countries is incredible. And it's only been in recent history where we've been able to do that in an immediate way. Anytime throughout the day or the night, we can connect, and we think that's great, and we want to share about that.
One of the things that we say is social media is not going away. In fact, it's just going to keep growing. It's going to keep expanding. And so we need to learn to live with it and work with it and value it for what it is.
It's not going away, that's for sure. So let's talk about that elephant in the room, the negative aspects of social media. What kind of historical perspective can you give us on social media and the negative aspects of it?
Well, we don't have our PowerPoint up in front of us here, but we're assuming that many of you are seeing a slide called The Evolution of Vulnerability. And on the slide, you'll notice two pictures. And the picture on the left is a picture of a person pulling up, a cartoon of a person pulling up their bootstraps. And what we say is that, decades ago, probably, let's say in the 1950s, a lot of, particularly men, had this understanding where I'm going to pull myself up by my own bootstraps. I'm not going to share what is actually going on, the deeper realities of my life, the deeper truths of my life. I'm going to just keep it inside, which there was obviously a level of unhealthiness to that. Then the picture on the right actually was a picture that I think was shared maybe a year ago on YouTube, and it blew up. It started to get thousands and thousands of hits because these girls attended a local baseball game, and they all sat down and immediately pull out all of their phones and take tons and tons of photos to find the perfect picture. And so what we talk about is how there's been this evolution over the last several decades where there was this unhealthiness of undersharing. And now what we see, particularly from a lot of millennials, is this idea of oversharing. And anybody who scrolls the walls of Facebook right now knows what we're talking about with this idea of oversharing, sharing too much of yourself and not keeping some things personal.
So you would say that this self-broadcasting is somewhat superficial, and I would tend to agree with you, particularly when you said they take out their phones and they look for the perfect picture. So there are a lot of moments that are passing while they're looking for that perfect picture to post to make their life look perfect. What does that cause?
Can you say that again?
Yeah, what does that cause, this self-broadcasting of the perfect picture? Because they really have a lot of friends. You know, many of my students will tout that they have over 500, 600, 700 friends on Facebook. So that's a pretty big deal that they have so many friends.
Well, one of the things in this next slide here, we talk about this paradox that even though today we are more connected than ever before, we're hyper connected with anyone we want to connect with who's got the technology. That's fantastic. But in so many ways, we are more disconnected than ever. And it's impossible to have and to know intimately and well and deeply 500 people. It's just not possible. And so we've got all these friends, quote unquote, but how many of them do we really know well? And this picture right here is very typical. And I remember a vacation that I was on with my family several years ago. We were out to breakfast, and it was at a beach resort. And a family came in, a mother, a father, and their adult daughter. And each one of them sat down, just like this family in this picture, with their phones. They were obviously on vacation as well because of the way they were dressed, and here they were. They didn't spend any time talking with one another while they were on vacation, sat at breakfast, looking at their phones, texting, talking. I one of the mother in the group was obvious, even though she was on vacation, she seems still to be working. Her office was calling her. She was calling her office. And so the whole point, at least, to be on vacation was missed. And the whole point to be with your family, those closest to you, was missed as well. I also live in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and in Hershey we have an amusement park called Hershey Park, and lots of roller coasters, lots of rides. It's a great family place. And whenever we go, it's just incredible to see all the people groups of people, families, friends, walking with one another, not talking with one another, but looking at their phones, texting, looking at Facebook, reading some kind of news or whatever it is. And that is the cause, that's what happens. And that's why, we're concerned about people, they can connect. They are really not connecting on a human, personal level.
Yeah, and then if you go to the next slide, one of the things that we say is that we live, this age of superficiality, and it's the plague of our times. We've historically now 3 years in a row been speaking to this one group. It's a local Rotary club, and Rotary International gives a lot of money away, and so they support our nonprofit heavily, and we value that tremendously. But there's this one Rotary in particular that we've gone to several times, 3 years in a row, and we often jokingly say we've sat at the same table 3 years in a row, and we've heard the same jokes, the same kind of coarse ripping of one another. And there's just a lack of intimacy and vulnerability, even in a group like that, where these individuals know each other, but they don't really know each other on a deeper, more personal level.
Yeah, I can really connect with that, no pun intended. I was in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago, and I was staying at a friend's house, and there were a total of 5 of us there. And our last morning together, we got breakfast, and we took it to the dining room table, and everyone was on their phones. And I just looked around at everyone, and I said, since this is our last time together, maybe we could put down our phones and actually be with each other. And even though somebody jokingly called me the typical school teacher, everyone agreed that the phone just can be so addictive, and it's so exciting to see, your post and what people have commented on your post and things like that. So we just have to be really diligent in recognizing that even though the phone can be a really good thing, it can't be a good thing all of the time, particularly when you're supposed to be face-to-face with other people. So we have to be in control of the phone as opposed to the phone being in control of us. So before we move to the positives of social media, so we can really get into how you two have harnessed the power of using social media for good, let's use the chat feature. So Phil, can you remind the listeners how to do this? And right before you do, let me just say that listeners, whenever we see these hands, these multicolored hands with the question marks, that means that we would like you to participate. So you can send in your questions to chat, and then I think, Phil will tell us how that works.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Laura. Once again, on the control panel on the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little icon. It's almost like a balloon icon right there, and it says chat underneath it. If you would like to ask a question, just please click on that chat button, and I have the chat box open. And you can ask type the question in there. But if you'd like to talk, I will unmute you, and then you can chat with our hosts.
And they will have to put in a message in the chat room that they would like to talk. Is that correct?
Yeah, if they don't want to, if they would like to chat by talking, or if they have their message, but still just put it in the chat box and I'll be able to recognize that. I have both of those boxes open right now.
Terrific. And so the question that I would like to throw out, if people don't have questions of their own, social media, does it connect or disconnect people in real life? What do you think? We've got Gwen Garrison.
Yes.
Can you unchat her?
Gwen, would you like to chat with the hosts? I'll unmute your
microphone.
Just give me a second here. Here we go. Okay, you are unmuted, Gwen.
Well, that might be a scary thing. I don't know if I'm a recovering academic, but I'll try to be brief. I think the current state in the country is that it's operating in both ways. It is connecting us with other people, but I think on the other part is it's dangerously could be boxing us in to only hearing from people that are like-minded to us. And I think that's just the overload that certainly I'm experiencing in social media, but also the amount of trolling that is going on, as well as people who seem to be dedicated to putting out and forwarding disinformation. I think that there's some real dangers out there regarding all of that, just trying to sort out what is the truth.
Yeah, and Gwen, I really like what you say about social media dividing us, particularly right now. I hear almost on a daily basis how people are unfriending people who have the opposite political opinions, as opposed to listening to see how they drew their conclusions. And then when you add into that the point that you made, Gwen, about I think you called it trolling and misinformation, or the new term, which I love, alternative facts, and not knowing what's true and what isn't true anymore. Thanks, Gwen.
John Backman has a comment, and John, if you just go to the microphone, you can unmute your microphone.
I'm way ahead of you, Phil.
Wonderful. Thanks, John.
I'm with Gwen on one aspect of this, and that is, I think the answer was yes. It disconnects us and it connects us. I remember distinctly being at an ILA conference and talking with a few presenters who are millennials, and they made the point that has borne out in my experience, which is that it's not necessarily better or worse than traditional communication. It is simply different, and it has a different set of problems and plays by a different set of rules. I know I spend an awful lot of time on social media because I work from home, and and largely by itself, and have found it in general a very rich method of social interaction. Not all that unlike face-to-face, but again, with its own set of problems.
Yeah, that's a really good point, John. And I like that you use the term millennials, because millennials, of course, are the first generation to grow up with technology from the beginning. And so they don't have any memory of a life without technology. So to them, to your point, that's just what they know, and that's what's normal to them. So they've developed their own benefits to it, but also they recognize that there are some drawbacks to it as well. So not better or worse than the previous generation, just definitely different than the previous generation. And as Tom and Michael consistently say, and it's not going away. Yeah. It's just not going away. It's just going to get different again. I see we've got somebody else there too. Phil?
Jordan,
do we have somebody else?
Jordan's asked a question here, made a comment that says, Jordan, if you'd like to speak, you can actually unmute your microphone. But Jordan says that he believes that technology can disconnect because people feel invincible behind the screen. Even loved ones who we felt it was connecting to us end up being almost the one thing to give the right for people to speak up. And I was actually having a conversation with some of my students about this, and I have a lot of students, and they're all millennials. and some of them were saying, yes, that this really disconnects us, but others were saying, no, I get deeper relationships, and we were trying to connect the two. So I think it's both. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely both.
Yeah,
one of the experiences that we have is that because we connect with people in so many different ways, what we always ask them when they reach out to us for us to listen to their story and help them through it, we always ask, how do you want to connect? Do you want to, if we're local, do you want to meet face to face? Do you want to Skype? Do you want to talk on the phone? Do you want to email? Do you want to text us? And in fact, just yesterday, we had someone who reached out to us via email, and we asked her, we asked her some questions and how would she like to continue to connect with us. And she chose to email. She said, I just want to email for now. And what we've understood with some other people, one of the very first people we ever connected with only wanted to email us. And she said, if I saw you face to face, I'd want to make you like me. But if I wanted you to like me, I wouldn't tell you the truth.
Oh.
Which we thought was very profound and very insightful. There are those people who have a hard time really opening up and being vulnerable and sharing who they really are if they have to look at someone face to face. And there are those people who can do it much better, at least to start. We always believe that face to face, if that's possible, is better. Absolutely. But there are those who need that, who need the safety of whether it's an email or whether it's over the phone or texting or whatever. Otherwise, they don't feel comfortable. And we hope that we can help them to begin to feel comfortable. That's the ultimate goal. But if they wouldn't have this kind of technology and the ability to reach out in these different kinds of ways, they would never reach out at all.
Yeah, and what you just said, Michael, my researcher mind, went into full gear. I wonder if this is a function of different generations. So, you and I, being a little bit more chronologically gifted, always think face-to-face is best. But perhaps millennials think that maybe email is best to begin with, because perhaps they're used to using media to not necessarily tell the truth. Interesting. I see that Kay Lindahl actually wanted to say something. Might you be able to unmute her, Phil?
She's unmuted. Hi, Kay.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Kay.
Hi. I just finished reading Sherry, I don't know if she pronounces it Turkle or Turkel, her book, Reclaiming Conversation, The Power of Talk in a Digital Age. And she's been studying this for years now, and she says that we have sacrificed conversation for mere connection. And she says the cost of that is a loss of empathy. And she talks a lot about how all this digital communication does not allow us to develop the capacity of empathy. And she gives lots and lots and lots of examples of that, and how that the young people, the millennials, they're just very, very fearful in a way of face-to-face conversation, because when they told her that when they communicate digitally, they can edit what they say. They don't make mistakes. It's much smoother. And it's like, so you don't learn the back and forth of conversation. You don't learn how that what you say impacts somebody. You can tell by the way they're responding, either body language, or they'll say something, or they'll move a certain way, they'll do something. And so you never develop that sense of empathy. And I was really fascinated by this book. I found it very, very, very helpful to read.
That really is interesting. Yeah, because you can always edit and make it perfect.
Exactly. So they present themselves in a way that's not really real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, Kay, go ahead.
I said they hide that part of themselves. They edit it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to be careful, because I know Kay well, and Kay is one of the most loving, wonderful people that anyone would ever meet. She has the most beautiful soul. And I know that none of us here today really are doing the millennial bashing.
No.
And as my millennials say to me, well, Dr. Day, who do you think gave us these devices, right? Our parents gave us the phones, our parents gave us the iPads. So it really is our fault, per se, in terms of providing these devices and not providing that instruction or experience, I think, of, as you say, empathy and the face-to-face time with families.
Yeah, one of the things she talks about in the book is how that the parents sometimes are on the phone more than the kids. So they model the behavior that they're seeing in the kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely not. About millennial bashing. It's an observation.
Thank you, Kay. I certainly appreciate it. Let's go back to the PowerPoint, because now we actually are going to get into the meat of what these two gentlemen would like to talk about today. And today's objectives then with Tom and Michael, I apologize, how to connect intentionally through social media, creating safety for people to share openly, vulnerably, and healthily. That's a hard word to say, guys. And then how to find common ground between diverse individuals. So, Tom and Michael, if you had to sum up tips on how to connect intentionally using social media, what would you say they are? Look at that.
Well, first, there you can see them. We believe that these are some of the tips, some very important tips, is to be authentic. Just as we hope we could be face-to-face. You can be authentic, in your writing and in your in emails and in texting and, on Skype or over the phone, whatever means of technology you use, it's being authentic. And we can talk more about that. It's being consistent. It's being present and earning the right to be heard. And we've got a couple of stories that we could share. And we'll go ahead with that.
Yeah,
please do. Yes.
One of our favorites to share actually happened last New Year's Eve here in the United States, and we had a couple counseling calls, listening calls scheduled that day. Two of which were happening at the same time, which is, it was hard to do in the moment. We were trying to be fully present, fully engaged. But again, we try to, really give somebody our undivided attention. And we were in the middle of a conversation with somebody, private messaging on Facebook is one of the things that we do often. And this person lived in Africa. And that conversation ended, and that individual was celebrating his new year in Africa, which was pretty profound. And just a few minutes later, we were setting up a phone conversation with a man from Saudi Arabia. And he happened to be of a different faith background as us. And it was incredible to be able to form this very intimate connection with this man. And it just so happened that day, the relationship really took on a whole new level, because he, like us, is a dad. And at that moment, he was in a very vulnerable spot, because he had just lost not just his first child, but his second child. And just a year prior, around that same time of year, he had lost his first child to spina bifida. And that second conversation that we had with him on New Year's Eve last year was one of the more intimate conversations we had ever had, because most of the conversation was him just crying. And it was very open and authentic. And we certainly could form that level of connection as dads, in the most human way. We could understand what he was going through as fathers ourselves.
Because the fact is that, for using this as an example, the death of a child affects a father in the very same way, no matter where he is from, what his religion is, where he lives, what language he speaks, what culture he's grown up in. I mean, pain is pain, loss is loss. And to be able to recognize that and be empathetic about that. And we, that's when we talked about empathy just a few moments ago, we think that is so important. And we strive mightily to convey empathy, in whatever way we are connecting with somebody, whether we're writing, whether we're Skyping, whether we're talking on the phone, or whether we're face to face, that is so important. And to be able to acknowledge the pain that father was feeling, when someone who lived halfway around the world, that was really part of the, that authenticity, which we think was very, very important.
When we say be consistent, we try to set up appointment times with people. So this man in Saudi Arabia, we set up a time with him that we're going to give you this time right now, we're going to give you our undivided attention. And then when we say be present, one of the phrases we use all the time is be with the person that you're with. So whether it's you're meeting somebody face to face, wherever you find yourself, or you find somebody on Facebook and spend time with that person, be fully present, be fully engaged, get to know him or her on a much deeper level.
And also earning the right to be heard means that establish trust. Establish the fact that you will listen to somebody. You'll do all those other things. Be authentic, consistent, present. But people will begin to trust you when you spend the time with them, when you share the time. You really listen without judging, without interrupting, without giving them a hard time for something they might say or write or have done. But continue listening. And the longer you listen, the more you can get to the heart of the matter of what a person is going through. And there's a saying that we love very much, that the more you learn someone's story, the more you learn to love them. Mm-hmm. And the more you learn to love them, the more empathetic and compassionate and gracious you will be to them, the more connected you will be, more intimately. And we think that's very, very important.
Yeah, two things that you just said that really struck me. This idea, and I don't know that you use the term exactly, but one of your motivations is to find common ground. So you're not looking for the differences in people. You're looking to see what's common. And both of you being fathers, that was your common ground with the father in Saudi Arabia. So everything else didn't matter. It was the point that you were all fathers there.
That's right.
And then I know in reading your book, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well, you really have this idea of earn the right to be heard. So you don't give advice, you don't give your opinions until you have earned that right with them. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we've been asked often on the radio or even some of our TV interviews, do you ever kind of take, in our case, we're both, just so you know a little bit more about us, we are trained pastors who have served in churches, but felt a special, we say, calling to connect with people on a much broader and a much deeper level outside the local church. And so that's why we started our mission. But, one of the things that we say often is that you really do need to earn the right to be heard, and to be able to speak into somebody's life. Without that level of trust, they're not going to care what you have to say. Most of us don't like to be told what to do. I think in one of our trial webinars, we had said we should always remove the words should and ought. And I just said should in that statement, but we should try our best to remove those phrases, because most of us don't like to be told what to do. We like to kind of find, our own way forward. And we often call ourselves permission givers. We give people permission to make decisions. And we think that that's a good way to look at it.
I like that, permission givers. Tom and Michael, I noticed that we are blowing up with people who want to share on this topic as well. So we're going to throw out this question and go to those 4 people that we have in line. If you would like to contribute, please let Phil know so he can unmute you. Or Phil, they can unmute themselves at this point. Is that correct?
They can do that, and I know Terry Varner already has some comments that she'd like to make. So Terry, I've already unmuted you.
Hi, thanks. This is Terry Varner. I'm an associate professor of communication at St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas. And one of the classes that I'm teaching in the spring semester happens to be Intro to Communication. And we're coming off the heels of Chapter 2, and we watched some pretty powerful TED Talks. One of them had to do with the power of introverts by Susan Cain, and the second one was had to do a little bit more with some extroverts and introverts by Dr. Brian Little. But I wanted to bring up this the idea, maybe it was Gwen, but this whole idea of our millennials being so afraid of face-to-face interactions is a real thing. We were talking about one of their assignments is to create a self-concept collage, and we were talking about how many people might have the written word introverts on there. The majority of the class had already identified themselves as introverted. And it was in both sections. Most of my students are introverts, which is, interesting because this is a communication class. And so everybody thinks that students have to be, comm majors have to be extraordinarily extroverts. So to have this, this switch with this age group, to me, really has to do with their level of technology. And some of the introverts were sharing that they really like the fact that they don't have to directly interact with somebody other than to take a picture or snap a video, because they've controlled that environment and they're only sharing it with the friends and family members that they want to see. And then there's this violation of trust that happens, of course, because then it gets retweeted and retweeted and retweeted, and then they go right back to this, loss of, I feel completely vulnerable, and the world, I have the access to the world, and the world is this really, really scary place. And then, but it's a struggle. I watch the students really struggle, and one of the things they shared, and I'll stop very briefly. I'll stop quickly because I want to get your response on this. But the takeaway that I got was they're taking this Intro to Comm class because they know that interpersonal relationships are important, but they're also scary, so scary that they would prefer to just go to their phones and to kind of like, you understand? But yeah, they're just terrified of people.
Yeah, I have the exact same experience that you do too, Terry, and I think it's even more and more important that people get some basic communication training, because they're not having, as I tell my students, it makes sense that you're afraid of this face-to-face conversation. My generation grew up sitting around the dining room table, and we all had to sit there and we all interacted with each other, and there wasn't a screen on, there was no television on, there was no radio on, the cell phone hadn't been invented yet, right? So we practiced conversation, and I didn't realize, and I don't think anybody realized at that point, that we were actually practicing face-to-face conversation. But since the millennials have grown up with phones and screens at the dining room table, even if they're oftentimes they're not even seated around the same dining room table, they didn't have that time to practice like previous generations have had time to practice. And so they do recognize that it's very scary. Thanks for sharing that, Terry. And I see we've got a couple of other people too, Phil.
We do. We have two, one from Helen, and I've already unmuted her microphone, and one from one of our listeners listed as ILA 916 with some fascinating observations. So Helen, and then whomever ILA 916 is, I have your microphones unmuted so you can interject.
Okay, Phil, do you want me to talk now?
Sure.
Yes.
Hi, Helen.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I guess most of us who are interested in listening have thought about the points that Tom and Michael are making about being authentic, present, consistent, etc. And I'm thinking that all of these things apply to face-to-face conversations. What I was particularly interested in is whether Tom and Michael have ideas that apply specifically to social media. I'm thinking, are there things I should be learning about how to interact on social media that are different from the way we interact in other media?
Actually, one of the points I was just going to make, that's an excellent question. Thank you for asking it. One of the points I was going to make just a minute ago is that we need to learn how to ask good questions. Michael and I, in our friendship and our working relationship, one of the traditions that we have here locally is every year on Christmas Eve here in central Pennsylvania, we go up to a hotel and we sit and we have a drink together and we ask each other intense questions. We're constantly trying to learn more about each other, and we do this with our spouses at home, and we do this with our kids. I did it this morning. I was out to breakfast with my kids, and I went in to that breakfast this morning with a couple of questions in mind that's going to naturally spark deeper conversation. And I think that that's one of the principles that we value maybe the most, is asking good questions.
Tom, Tom, I'm sorry to interject, but you can't put that out there and not tell us the questions that you went prepared with.
Well, I can reference one from this past Christmas Eve that Michael and I shared together, as we had asked each other, what does success look like? And success can mean a variety of things for a variety of different people. For us, our responses, we'll just give you a glimpse, it was all about relationships. We want our legacy to be about fostering relationships that matter. Mm-hmm. My question this morning was actually about do my two oldest kids who are in elementary school, do they hear much about the news? And if so, does that ever concern them? And so it was that just naturally evoked good conversation. So I think whether it is through face-to-face interaction or through social media, we try to ask questions that are going to spark vulnerability.
And sometimes it's admitting, a lot of times it's admitting that we're scared about something. I'm really afraid to do this. I'm afraid to enter in this situation. And it's amazing when someone is willing to be vulnerable and share something like that, how many other people will speak up and say, yeah, me too. And that is so significant.
Mm-hmm.
We find that makes a difference all the time. If we're willing to admit our own worries, anxieties, fears, that it's incredible what that will spark, and the connection that will happen, and the conversation that will happen, and the empathy that will be generated because of that.
Yeah, and I know that speaking for all of the educators who are listening in today, we have seen evidence of that in the classroom when somebody is vulnerable enough to express a fear, about an assignment that's going on or something like that. There are lots of other people who just kind of expel air, and they're like, wow, there's somebody else like me. That's so wonderful. And you're right, it does invoke a lot of empathy.
We one of the people we love to read and quote and listen to is Dr. Brene Brown, who is a researcher at the University of Houston. And we listened to a TED Talk that she did a couple of years ago. And the TED Talk it took place in Texas where she lives. So she drove to several hours to wherever she needed to be. And she opened up her talk by being very vulnerable right up front. She said, for those of you who travel, and I'm not sure what the route number is, I'm just going to make one up, Route 11, north from Houston. She said, I just want you to know at exit 28, there's a speed trap. And I know it because I was caught in it. And it elicited a lot of laughter. It broke the ice. And it showed that here was this, now very famous researcher, best-selling author, who is just like everybody else, goes too fast sometimes, gets caught, and by sharing that, it just made her much more accessible, we felt, much more human, much more easy to talk to, and to then maybe even respond to and respect, because she was willing to share that and that very common human experience.
And I'd say back to the question I was just asking a minute ago, one of the dilemmas that we see is that people are sometimes not having healthy boundaries with vulnerability. So they'll just blast the walls of Facebook with whatever their fear is. And then it just kind of elicits kind of an uncomfortable response from a lot of individuals. And then some people are quick to share and respond, and others are like ourselves, are not usually quick to respond. But it would be better in our minds to have maybe a private Facebook messaging with just a few people that are trustworthy, where you could say, hey, I'm fearful of this right now, and I really trust you three, and I just needed to share it.
And it's part of the response as well. So somebody admits they're afraid of something, and the response to elicit deeper connection and conversation is not to say, I can't believe you feel that way. Even if you think that, your gut reaction is, I can't believe that you would say this or feel that way. Don't say that, because that immediately closes doors. And then people are much less likely, much more reluctant to open up again. So that's important.
So Michael and Tom, I just have to point something out. I'm laughing here inside. I'm trying not to laugh outside. But we only have 10 minutes left.
Okay.
And you two are so captivating that we haven't even gotten through a half of the material that we had prepared, even though we've slashed it subsequently from our past two calls. So I'm glad that you are willing to spend another hour with us after the traditional hour. I see we've got 9 people who really want to participate as well. Let's go first to ILA 916. I'm dying to figure out who this person is.
They're unmuted.
ILA 916, who are you? The mystery will remain.
Okay. Why don't we go to Mark then? Mark, I'm unmuting your microphone.
Mark, are you here with us?
I am not sure.
No.
Okay.
No, Mark? Okay, who's next in line?
Okay, let's see. Well, Terry Varner mentions the TED Talk. Terry, I will unmute your microphone. Go ahead, Terry.
Well, they had you both just mentioned the power of vulnerability. I did have a question, if you could. So I'm trying to put this into context of, as an educator for the students who are primarily millennials. Do you think that there is or what potential do you think that our millennials or the millennials have in terms of the evolution of vulnerability? You think that they'll be more willing to be vulnerable now that there's so much uncertainty? Or do you think that there's this movement where people are like, I don't care, I'm going to be vulnerable, and, you know, I'm going to just put it out there and expect the world to listen to? What are your thoughts about that?
I think what we're seeing on the walls of Facebook, you could open it up right now, is a level of vulnerability, but we think it's oftentimes very unhealthy. Even in the most political scene right now, where everybody just blasts their thoughts and opinions, and it's not really creating healthy dialogue or healthy connections. So that there is a level of vulnerability there, but it's not necessarily healthy vulnerability. Brene Brown, again, we quote her all the time. I mean, she would often say, if you have one or two people in your life with whom you can form deep, intimate connections, then she would define that as success. You know, and I think for all of us, and I'm right on the cusp of a millennial, is to have a couple individuals in our lives that we can form deep, intimate connections with. You know, sadly, I think we're trying to mask maybe we don't know how to have healthy relationships, so we mask it by just blasting the walls of Facebook, which is not a healthy medium in our minds.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on that idea, and it kind of goes back to what Terry had talked about in terms of vulnerability too. I think oftentimes what I see on Facebook is more self-broadcasting than it is vulnerability, because I think vulnerability requires the opportunity or the responsibility, I'm not sure which would be more appropriate, to I don't want to say defend your position, because it's not always defend your position, but to be open in sharing your position, which also requires you to be open to listen to other positions. And I think a lot of times in self-broadcasting, you know, that is just your position, and you really don't want to hear or understand or listen to anybody else's. You just want to get yours out there. And so I would be hesitant to call self-broadcasting vulnerability, I guess, for me. But this, yeah, we would have to go a little bit deeper in that. Let's go ahead, since we have about 4 minutes left of the first hour here, let's go ahead to the second question, or the next question, I should say, that we had. I am sorry. You would think that I would know how to work this even better. So how do you find common ground between diverse individuals? And I love when you guys use in your book this idea of the thing behind the thing. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you find common ground?
Yeah, and I'll try to give an example. I mean, I think in some of the relationships that we've had, particularly with men, you know, one of the things, let's say we'll give an example of, we all struggle sometimes with paying our bills. But it's not just the paying of the bills that's really what keeps us up at night. It's a deeper issue of measuring up in some way, or not measuring up as a man, and feeling like we're not measuring up. And I shared a very vulnerable story early on in our book of a time where I was literally without a home with my family. And at that time, we only had 2 out of 4 small kids. And, you know, we're sharing a mattress together in my sister-in-law's attic, and having one of these, you know, breakdowns, emotional breakdowns, that I'm just not hacking it. I'm not cutting it as a man. And, you know, that is something that is universal. So the thing behind the thing is what forms the deeper connections universally, because so not everybody deals with struggling to pay their grocery bills, but every man deals with the thing behind the thing of not feeling like they're measuring up in some way. And so if we can, in our relationships, figure out what those the deeper issues are, I think that is how we can connect even more.
And it gets back to some of the things we talked about earlier. We all have a voice. We all want to be heard. I think we all want to be respected. We all would love to be loved. And if we can remember that we all carry these human needs and feelings and emotions, that helps so much too. And you know, really makes a difference.
Absolutely. Let me just point out two things that we got in on the chat. Gwen reminded us that Facebook does have the ability to create private groups. So as you two indicated, that would be one way to be able to be more vulnerable through social media. If you're only transmitting, you know, I'm really scared today because I'm going in for this medical procedure or whatever, to the small private group that you've created, then there's definitely social media being used to create a sense of safety for you. And then also, I think it was ILA 916 who asked if he or she could have the PowerPoint. And the PowerPoint is actually, this whole webinar is being recorded, and we'll record the second hour as well. And that will be posted on ILA's website. Excuse me, not the website, but ILA's YouTube page. And we will try to make the PowerPoint then independently available on the website. So I'll have to talk to Nan and Helen about how we will be able to do that. It is actually 12 o'clock, so, it's 1 o'clock, or it's an o'clock wherever you're living around the world, I think. So it's an o'clock. So what we're going to go ahead and do is take about a 5-minute break. And after our 5-minute break, everybody will come back and we'll just open it up for discussion. I would like to thank everybody for attending the first hour and definitely invite you to stick around for the second hour. Unmute your microphone and let's get in and talk with each other. Thank you.
I am going to pause the recording right now and we'll resume when we come back for our second hour. Thank you, everybody, for being with us for this first hour.
Thank you.
Thank you.